From the time he rejected a pitch because of a nickname, to when he stormed off set, listening to the worst pitch ever. These are Mark Cuban's most brutal Shark Tank rejections. Now first things first, the bag bowl guys really annoyed him. This was a pretty neat idea, actually. It was this plastic sleeve kind of thing that could turn any bag into a bowl. And while the product seemed gimmicky, it was actually quite useful for people who travel a lot and have trouble eating. While the sharks were interested enough in the product to hear the pitch, there was something instantly annoying about the brothers, Kevin and Brian Fleming. They kept repeating the company's name really loudly. At one point, they even sang during the pitch. What did they want? $40,000 for a 33% stake in the company. Did they get it? Yes. Lori Greiner did eventually buy into the idea, but Mark Cuban wasn't sold. Neither was he amused by them. Sure, he was a little bit intrigued in the beginning, but when the Fleming brothers called him Cubes, that was it. The billionaire pulled out immediately, and he even said that his reason for doing so was because of their nickname for him. Kind of an overreaction if you ask me. But the thing is, even before Nickname Gate, it was pretty clear that Mark was pissed at Kevin and Brian. Like, he called them wantpreneurs, for crying out loud. That's basically entrepreneurs who want someone else to do all the work for them. Of course, he did it in his typical loud, brash style that can be just so intimidating. Tough to say what annoyed him more, the fact that they called him Cubes or that they were wantpreneurs. But hey, at least they got the investment they wanted. Tycoon Real Estate got nothing. In fact, Cuban even called it a straight-up scam. See, Aaron McDaniel went on the show to pitch his idea of a real estate crowdfunding service called Tycoon Real Estate. He hoped his service would allow regular folks to invest in the market. But the sharks thought it was too risky, and they didn't trust McDaniel to handle people's money. Mark Cuban called it a scammy idea. Barbara Corcoran thought it was spooky. And even Kevin O'Leary, who was actually interested in making a deal, asked if McDaniel had a criminal record. He wanted to get about 50 grand in investment in exchange for a 5% stake in the company. Unfortunately, it wasn't just Cuban who wasn't convinced. None of the sharks bought into the idea, and the company actually took quite the hit after Cuban called it a ripoff and a scam on the show. In fact, things got so bad that they eventually had to shut down operations. Yikes. But it gets worse. This one time, Cuban called an idea full of crap. Though he's known for being a bit of a loudmouth, calling a business crap was a bit much even for him. But if we're going to be brutally honest, he wasn't wrong. This entrepreneur, named Jason Woods, created an electric bodyboard called Chimera. During his pitch to the sharks, he asked for $250,000 in exchange for 20% of his company. The sharks thought the invention was really cool, but as the pitch went on, they started to realize that he didn't have a solid business plan. It turned out that Woods had spent the past 10 years investing $130 grand of his own money in creating only a prototype, with 0 customers or patents, even though he claimed he was ready to take it to the next level. In his signature style, Cuban yelled at him for being full of crap, and it got worse. Damon John said it was the worst pitch he'd ever seen on the show. Long story short, Woods didn't end up getting a deal. Not gonna lie, I felt sorry for this one. Woods was more of an inventor than an entrepreneur. Sometimes it really just boils down to the personal preference and quirks of the sharks. And that's exactly what happened to Ride Fresh. The product was brutally rejected for supporting the Golden State Warriors. The founders of the car air freshener company based in Los Angeles made a big mistake during their pitch to Mark Cuban. During the pitch, they gave different branded versions of their product to the panel of potential investors. But when they gave Cuban the air freshener, it was a Warriors edition. This didn't go over well with Cuban, who is the owner of the NBA team, the Dallas Mavericks. He immediately called it the dumbest marketing move ever and said he was out. Cuban explained that the Warriors are the team that beat his Mavericks in the NBA Conference Finals, so it was not a smart move to give him that particular air freshener. Luckily, the founders were able to recover from the mistake and eventually struck a deal with Barbara Corcoran for $200,000 in exchange for a 1/5 equity stake in the company. As they left the show, the founders apologized to Cuban, who seemed to have cooled off a bit by then. All in all, it was a lesson learned about the importance of reading the room and knowing your audience when it comes to marketing. Luckily, the business is doing pretty well now, but that still doesn't take away the stinger of a comment by Cuban. That said, this wasn't the meanest thing he's ever said to a contestant. He's got a sharp eye, and he's not afraid to call BS on things that just don't make sense, like those ESSO watches. The whole premise of this product was based on pseudoscience. Ryan Naylor brought his ESSO watches to the Shark Tank, claiming they could improve users' health by using negative ions, while Lori Greiner was intrigued by the product product and even tested it out, Cuban was not convinced. As Naylor attempted to distribute watches to the Sharks to try out, Cuban straight up declined, saying that he was allergic to scams. How's that for honesty? Even a Dallas Mavericks blue watch couldn't win him over. Cuban's strong reaction shut down the pitch and highlighted the importance of building trust with potential investors. As an entrepreneur, it's important to have a solid business plan, backed up by reliable data, if you want to convince investors that your product or service is worth their time and money. A unique concept can definitely get people interested, but not enough to sustain a long-term sustainable business. The watches did not secure any kind of investment from the Sharks. Besides, Cuban is too much of a no-nonsense guy to fall for a watch with health benefits, which is why he also dumped the no-phone idea. Van Gould and Chris Sheldon were two advertising creatives with a unique idea in 2014. They created a kind of gag gift to satirize our excessive attachment to smartphones and the resulting antisocial behavior. It was called the No Phone, a useless piece of plastic that was marketed as a way to help break smartphone addiction. They even raised about $18,000 initially for their product through Kickstarter, and their witty satire of companies like Apple was amusing. But when Gould and Sheldon entered the Shark Tank, it was a completely different experience for them altogether. Their pseudo-pitch for a $25,000 investment in exchange for 25% equity was cringeworthy. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if the duo was building a novelty gift business or simply mocking the process. The Sharks appeared to be in on the joke, but only to a certain degree. However, you can always trust Cuban to be brutally honest. He said there was only one thing he hated more than people staring at their phones, and that was dumb patents. Ouch. So even though the rest of the Sharks found the idea mildly amusing, it wasn't enough for them to invest in it. And while Shark Tank has had its share of poor pitches, this next one really takes the cake. In fact, Cuban called it the worst pitch ever. Brothers Richard and Albert Amini pitched their company, Rolodoc, to the investors, looking for a $50,000 investment in exchange for % equity. Their idea, a proposed social network that would connect doctors with their patients. Simple idea, but definitely not original. The presentation didn't go so well. See, the problem was that the brothers didn't really have a solid business plan. They just had a bunch of buzzwords like security, encryption, email, and social media. And when Cuban started asking questions, they didn't have any answers. The brothers had a vision for a smartphone app that would allow patients to message their doctors, but they couldn't explain how they would convince physicians to actually join. Cuban didn't think the social aspect of Rolodoc would be successful, so he ultimately passed on investing. But it was the drama of it that made this particular rejection so brutal. Right after the brothers were done pitching, Cuban walked up to them, shook hands with them, and congratulated them on having the worst presentation ever. Damn, that's gotta hurt. From rejecting a pitch just because they called him Cubes, to the healthcare app that was just the worst presentation ever. These were Mark Cuban's most savage Shark Tank rejections.